It began with whispers, not from the mouths of the living, but from the dead. In the winter of 1916, Carl Jung was sitting alone in his house in Küsnacht when the silence cracked open. He had just emerged from the most turbulent period of his life, a psychological unraveling, or what others might call a spiritual awakening. For 3 years he had been plunging into the depths of his unconscious, recording visions, dreams, and dialogues in what would later be called the Red Book. But this night was different. The air grew heavy. He felt an invisible presence flood the room, as if the souls of the forgotten were pressing against the walls of time, begging to be heard. That's when it came to him, not as a thought, but as a transmission, a message dictated through him, a sermon, no, 7 sermons, and Jung didn't sign his name. Instead, he wrote, "Written by Basilides in Alexandria, the city where the East touches the West." This was not metaphor. This was not fiction. This was not analysis. This was the ghost gospel. Who was Basilides? He was a 2nd century Gnostic teacher who lived in Alexandria, a mystical hub where Greek philosophy collided with Egyptian magic, where Hebrew wisdom danced with Eastern mysticism. Basilides was remembered as a heretic by the Church Fathers, an esoteric rebel who claimed to hold the secret to reality, a secret that could only be whispered, not shouted. His original gospel is lost to history, but on that cold night in 1916, his spirit, or something that wore his name, entered Jung's consciousness and dictated what would become known as the 7 Sermons to the Dead. Was it channeling? Was it psychosis? Or was Jung tapping into a dimension beyond time, where ancient archetypes still breathe? He later called this phenomenon the mana personality, a force that possesses the ego and speaks with divine authority, not unlike a prophet or a possessed oracle. Jung was shaken by it, and yet he recorded it. He always recorded everything. The 7 Sermons to the Dead begins with a voice that commands attention, not analytical, not therapeutic, but sacred. The dead came back from Jerusalem where they found not what they sought. They prayed me let them in and besought my word, and thus I began to teach them. The dead came back, not metaphorical dead, but the truly dead, and they wanted wisdom that they could not find in religion, in doctrine, or in the resurrected Christ. They came to Jung, and through him, to Basilides, for what was buried beneath the surface of dogma. What followed were 7 deeply mystical declarations about the nature of existence. But this wasn't just esoteric poetry. It was Jung's philosophy, raw and unfiltered, before it was sanitized for textbooks and seminars. Here, he revealed the primal reality behind duality, the pleroma, a vast, undivided field where all opposites cancel each other out, and yet from which all opposites emerge. The pleroma is both beginning and end. It pervades everything, for it is the foundation of the created world. There is no good or evil in the pleroma, no male or female, no light or darkness. All these things exist only as differentiations, as illusions of the human mind struggling to make sense of something it can never truly grasp. This is not just philosophy, it is cosmic psychology, a map of the soul's origin, drawn in the language of myth. But the pleroma was only the beginning, for from this undivided, unknowable fullness emerged something terrifyingly real. Abraxas. Not God, not the devil, not even a balance of both. Abraxas is the totality. Abraxas is the God whom it is difficult to know. His power is the greatest because man does not perceive it. He is light and dark, creation and destruction, love and cruelty, bound into one. To invoke Abraxas is not to seek comfort, it is to confront the unbearable paradox at the heart of all existence. And it is here that Jung begins to show the dead and us what lies beyond religion, beyond rationality, beyond the dualistic comfort of good versus evil. Abraxas is the union of opposites. He shatters our moral framework and replaces it with something more honest, more terrifying, wholeness. And in Jungian terms, this is the self, not the ego, not the mask we wear to function in the world, but the integrated totality of all that we are, the saint, the monster, the lover, the killer, the divine, and the profane. To meet Abraxas is to meet the self, But that meeting is not peaceful. It is a death, a crucifixion of the ego, a resurrection of something older, more ancient than we can imagine. But why did the dead come? Why did Jung feel them pressing in, asking for these sermons? Because they were lost, not in hell, but in meaninglessness. These are not the damned. They are the spiritually starved, those who died under the weight of dogma, who believed in systems that never delivered transformation. They are symbols of our modern condition, spiritually exhausted, intellectually bloated, emotionally numb. They are the voices within all of us who once sought salvation in certainty, and found only silence. And so they return. They knock. And Jung, sitting alone in the haunted quiet of his study, lets them in. He gives them not theology, but depth, not salvation, but psychological truth. In the later sermons, Jung, through Basilides, introduces two powerful figures, the sun and the moon, not as celestial objects, but as living archetypes. The sun is the highest good, the light, the luminous one. The moon is the night, the soul, the shadow. These are not enemies, they are partners in the soul's evolution. The sun represents spirit, clarity, reason, and ascent. The moon is the unconscious, the realm of dreams, shadows, and femininity. To become whole, one must not reject the moon. One must descend into it. One must embrace the irrational, the erotic, the emotional, the wounded. This is Jung's entire psychology, hidden in mythic form. The descent into the shadow, the embrace of the anima, the feminine soul within the man, or the animus within the woman. The terrifying truth that to become truly yourself, you must integrate all that you are not. And then, just as the sermons reach their peak, something happens. The dead leave, without explanation, without gratitude. Then, the dead came to an end, for they found what sufficed them. They did not know what they sought. They were not seeking knowledge. They were seeking wholeness, and when they received it, in symbolic form, they disappeared. And Jung, he was left shaken, awakened, forever changed. He would go on to explore these themes in psychological types, in symbols of transformation, and in his later writings on alchemy and individuation. But the 7 Sermons to the Dead was his rawest moment, his sacred transmission, his mythic initiation, and he never included it in his academic writings. He only shared it privately, enclosing it in red leather and hiding it in his personal library. Because this was not for the world of professors and doctors, this was for the dead, and for those of us who feel, from time to time, like the dead. You see, Jung understood something that few psychologists dared to admit. The psyche is not a machine. It is a myth. It is a cathedral haunted by gods long forgotten, a labyrinth of dreams, trauma, visions, and archetypes, all alive, all waiting. And in 1916, when the dead came knocking, Jung did not analyze them. He listened, because he knew they were more than metaphors. They were fragments of forgotten humanity. They were the parts of ourselves we've exiled, the mystical, the irrational, the dark. This is why he attributed the work to Basilides, not to claim historical continuity, but to acknowledge that this message was not his ego speaking. Basilides became a symbol, a voice of the Gnostic lineage re-emerging in the modern age. A whisper from Alexandria echoing through time, carried by a man who dared to descend into himself. To Jung, Basilides wasn't just a figure from history. He was an archetype, the eternal teacher who bridges the known and unknown, the conscious and unconscious, the earthly and divine. And in many ways, Jung's entire psychological project was to translate Gnostic experience into modern language. Where Basilides spoke of aeons, Jung spoke of archetypes. Where Gnostics sought gnosis, Jung pursued individuation. Where ancient mystics saw Abraxas, Jung saw the self, not as doctrine, but as a path. And the path is dangerous, because it demands that we give up the illusion of moral simplicity. It asks us to confront the divine within our shadow, and the shadow within our divinity. Jung once said, "The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego." That's what happened on that night. The ego lost, and something far older, far deeper stepped forward. We call it the unconscious, but in moments like this, it's not unconscious at all. It's hyperconscious. It is the part of you that remembers eternity. It is the voice that speaks in dreams you don't understand, in synchronicities that defy reason, in symbols that appear with numinous weight. The 7 sermons were not a side project. They were the first breath of Jung's true life's work, the moment the mystic and the psychologist became one. After that night, Jung's visions continued. He returned to the inner world again and again, always as a visitor, never as a conqueror. He explored alchemy, astrology, mythology, not as hobbies, but as maps of the psyche, as ancient technologies that modernity had discarded but never replaced. He realized that our rational age had amputated the soul, and he sought to bring it back, not through dogma, but through symbolic depth. This is why Jung never founded a religion. He didn't want followers. He wanted individuals, people brave enough to face their own dead. And maybe that's what the 7 sermons really are. A challenge, a whisper through time, a call to descend into your own unconscious, and retrieve what has been forgotten. Not to be good, not to be saved, but to be whole, because wholeness is more terrifying than perfection. It requires you to love what you've been taught to hate, to hold your shadow like a child, and to kneel before a God who doesn't speak in commandments, but in contradictions. There's a reason Jung didn't publish the 7 sermons to the dead in his lifetime, because even in an age of breakthroughs and revolutions, this text was simply too much, too strange, too sacred, too alive. He feared that the world, obsessed with reason and progress, would mock what it could not understand, that they would label it delusion instead of revelation, psychosis instead of gnosis. And maybe he wasn't wrong. But what if the real question isn't whether Jung channeled a ghost? What if the question is, why did the ghost choose him? Jung's mind was not just brilliant, it was open. Open to contradiction, open to darkness, open to the possibility that the human soul is not just a product of biology, but a vessel of eternity. In his isolation, Jung became a vessel, and Basilides, or whatever force spoke in his voice, poured itself in, not to preach religion, but to deliver the forgotten code of the psyche, to remind us that the soul is not saved by obedience, it is saved by awakening. That truth is not found in answers, but in the courage to ask the unthinkable. Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." This was the awakening. This was the moment the old world fell away, the world of systems and theories, of maps and titles, and the great unknown opened like a storm cloud in his mind. It was not a night of comfort, it was a night of reckoning. The 7 sermons are not instructions, they are initiations. They are meant to unsettle you, to disrupt your certainty, to strip away the illusion that life is tidy or that good and evil are neatly divided. Abraxas, the Pleroma, the moon, and the sun, these are not just symbols, they are forces inside you, and if you don't face them, they will rule you from the shadows. Jung didn't want us to follow him, he wanted us to descend like he did, to listen for the voices of our own dead, to write our own gospel, not to convert others, but to integrate ourselves. Because in the end, the one who ignores the unconscious is not rational. They are ruled by what they refuse to see. That is why this moment, the night the dead returned to Jung's home, is not just a historical footnote, it is a spiritual turning point. Because it shows that even in the age of science and steel, the soul still speaks. Even through madness, even through ancient ghosts, even through a man sitting alone in the dark, pen trembling in his hand, listening to the voices no one else could hear. And maybe, if you sit quietly enough, if you descend far enough into your own forgotten rooms, you'll hear it too. Not in English, not in Latin, but in the dream language of the soul, the voice of the ghost, the whisper of Basilides, the sermon that was always waiting inside you. In the years that followed, Jung would go on to reshape the landscape of psychology forever. He gave us terms that now seem commonplace: archetype, shadow, anima, self. But none of these ideas were born from textbooks or lecture halls. They were born from silence, from visions, from dreams, from dead men knocking on the walls of his house and asking to be let in. It is easy now to sanitize Jung, to treat him like a respected academic, a father of modern psychology, a rational man who helped us understand ourselves. But that is not who he truly was. He was a mystic, a visionary who walked between the worlds, a man who lived on the edge of madness and found, not chaos, but meaning. And the 7 Sermons to the Dead was his initiation, his moment of surrender when he stepped beyond the veil and allowed the ancient voices to speak again. What's most unsettling is how familiar it all feels, because if you've ever felt the pull of something irrational inside you, a dream that wouldn't die, a symbol that followed you, a presence in your room when no one else was home, then you already know what Jung meant. The unconscious isn't a storage room for discarded memories. It's a living world, a cosmos of images and forces that move beneath the surface of your personality. And when it wants your attention, it doesn't ask politely. It shakes your life. It makes you ill. It fills your dreams with strange creatures. It brings the past into the present and the dead into your waking thoughts, until you finally stop trying to fix it and begin listening. The dead that came to Jung were not just from Jerusalem. They were from within him. They were the neglected voices of his own soul, the parts of himself exiled by reason, buried under years of training and expectation. That's why the 7 Sermons aren't just religious or poetic. They're psychological revolutions. They say, your soul has a voice, and it does not care about your theories. They say, there is something inside you older than morality and wiser than your intellect. They say, the ghosts are not haunting you. They are waiting for you to remember them. And this is what makes Jung's experience so terrifying and so beautiful, because it tells us that the soul doesn't die. It just waits, and when the moment is right, when the ego finally breaks open, it comes pouring back in, not as comfort, but as confrontation, not as light, but as truth. Abraxas doesn't come to save you. He comes to make you whole, and that's far more difficult. Today, the 7 Sermons are read as curiosities, an early, strange work by a young psychologist exploring mysticism. But that's not what they are. They are a transmission, a ghost gospel, a sacred text whispered not by a man but through him. And perhaps that is their true power, not in what they teach but in what they awaken. A remembrance, a feeling, a shiver in the bones of your soul that says, you've heard this before. Not with your ears, but with something older, something buried, something that remembers what it meant to be whole before you were born. So tonight, if you sit with silence and feel the walls grow heavy and hear a faint knocking behind your thoughts, don't be afraid. It may not be madness. It may not be imagination. It may be the ancient voice, the ghost gospel, the forgotten sermon that changed Jung forever. And it may be coming for you next.